And here is a lovely Erica Hornthal, known as the therapist who moves you. She's a board certified dance and movement therapist and licensed clinical professional counselor. As the CEO of Chicago Dance Therapy, she combines movement and somatic practices to address trauma, improve emotional well-being, and connect individuals to their bodies. Author of Body Aware, Erica advocates for using body-based techniques to process emotions and enhance mental health. So, welcome to the show, Erica. Absolute honor to
Thank
have
you so
you
much for
here.
having me.
Nice, amazing. Yeah, really, really looking forward to this because during my own training, somatic practices has been such a huge development, right? Recently, I mean, it's
Mm.
everywhere. Somatic healing this, somatic healing that. So, just from your own kind of experiences, so what is it that made you want to come into this line of work?
Um, yeah, just to speak to what you just said, yeah, it does feel like it's kind of exploding. And I feel like for me, a lot of that is directly correlated to just to how things are playing out in the world, right? It's like, it's no coincidence, I don't think, that the more disconnected we are from ourselves, the
Mm.
more we come back to needing to find a way back to ourselves. We're like, oh, there's so much chaos, there's so much anxiety. Maybe I should come back to that body. So it
It's true.
feels trendy to a lot of people, but I think for most of us who are used to or have always known the truth about working in the body, we're like, yay, finally. So what brought me to this work? I mean, I took a pretty traditional route when it comes to schooling. Went to undergraduate, went to university for psychology, and really naturally found my way into a graduate program specifically for dance movement therapy and counseling. Because at the time, I was very invested in dance and really invested in the sciences and social sciences in particular. Kind of wanted to go towards the medicine route, but realized that for many reasons that wasn't going to work out for me. And so I started to think about, well, I could care for people emotionally, psychologically.
Mm.
And someone along the way, very early on in my path, told me about the field of dance movement therapy, which in the UK is more typically known as dance movement psychotherapy. So we don't know a lot. We didn't know a lot about it in the United States. It's not really talked about as mainstream. Obviously, people hear about art therapy and music therapy, but dance and even drama therapy, there's really very little knowledge about that unless you happen to be existing in the field. And so I was so thankful for this professor who was like, I'm not a dance therapist, but I'm doing research on it and I know about it. This might be the career path for you. And yeah, the rest is pretty much history. So I again went to graduate school, did all the licensure and the testing, decided to go into practice for myself, and that was in 2011. And now we're here.
Wow, amazing. I love that. And
Hmm.
yeah, well done. Congratulations on this success. And, just the fact that, this is like you're embodying this, this is your work, your passion. You can actually tell. And I'm just intrigued to know, what your views are as to how dance and movement therapy specifically helps people to process trauma.
Sure.
Mm.
So my understanding of it has really evolved. I started off years ago really sticking to that textbook definition of the psychotherapeutic use of movement to help facilitate and integrate the mind, the body, the spirit, the social, the cognitive, the emotional, et cetera, parts of a person. And that worked for a while until I was like, what does that mean? We're getting further and further away from what psychotherapy is. People don't really understand the word integration. And the understanding of dance in our world is, at least in like kind of the Western world, is very much performance oriented. And so for someone who doesn't identify as a quote dancer, we really lose them in terms of, why would I use dance in mental health if that's not anything that I see myself doing? So my current understanding and definition that I work with is actually a Britannica definition of dance, which is the rhythmic body movement, rhythmic movement of the body that expresses a thought or an idea. And so when you look at it that way, we're all dancers. It's literally the first form of our communication. When we're infants, we're babies, you put on some music and we start moving. When we're happy, we move. When we're sad, we move. Everything's movement. So we're not looking at it as this performing art, right? We're looking at it as a means of expression, nonverbal communication. And why it's so important to trauma is for many reasons, but I think mostly because we know trauma changes the brain. We know that when we are triggered or we are traumatized, those higher functioning regions of the brain that we learn to rely on as we get older go offline. They're altered. And we have no choice but to go back to those primitive early parts of the brain stem, the limbic system, that bottom up processing to help reorient ourselves to the world post trauma and to help regulate our nervous system first and foremost to create more stability and grounding in our body. So ultimately we can feel safe to explore the world again. So I think of it again as like an infant or a toddler. We're not necessarily born knowing safety. We feel safe, right? Someone conjures up or allows us to feel safe in our environment through touch, through sound, through different sensory experiences. The same thing has to happen in trauma. It's like a rebirthing. We literally have to learn to sense the world to feel safe again. And dance and movement is the ultimate way to do that.
100%. Yes. Yeah. So true. And there's so many different techniques available now to, like, they say release the trauma, just like rebounding, for example, just
Mm-hmm.
doing that kind of movement up and down's really fantastic, for the limbic system, isn't it? And just for like releasing toxins as well. Yeah, because I'm sure there's some relation between toxins and trauma as well. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, just thinking about like body awareness. So, can you actually share an example of how body awareness plays a role in healing as well?
Well, so, just awareness in general, right? So much of what we do is on autopilot, especially when we're in this traumatized space, right? Um, so much of it is wanting to feel a sense of safety, right? Mitigating a sense of threat. And so body awareness, again, really goes to the heart of the matter. When I'm working with clients, especially, in terms of like trauma, I find it really valuable to notice how the body is showing up in times of trigger or times of overwhelm. So it's not even necessarily something we're adding or something that we have to learn. It's just cueing the awareness of what's happening in my body right now. What do I feel? My heart's racing, my hands are clammy or sweaty. I like people to try to pay attention to how their body is shaped in this moment. What's my posture looking like? Am I supported by, the chair or the environment that I'm in? Because the things that are working for me to feel safe, I want to lean into. And the things that are perpetuating the sense of threat, I actually want to rewire. So if I'm not feeling totally supported in this moment, I can bring in things that allow me to feel more supported. So body awareness, right, could be a deeper breath. It could be the touch of something around my body, or hugging myself. It could be a lowered gaze. There's no right way to do it. It requires you to understand what is it that I'm feeling and what is it that I need. So body and movement and that nonverbal piece, right? That non-language piece is most of our communication. So it's really important that we pay attention to it. And I think a lot of times we just see it as an extra exercise, right? Here's an exercise to bring in more awareness instead of just noticing what's already present. So
So true.
it's a real game changer for a lot of people because they're not paying attention to that. It's offline, right?
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, I was stuck in the past or just worried about the future. So it's,
Mhm.
hardly ever present. I mean, would the same apply for, let's just say, because, a lot of my listeners are actually currently, unfortunately, they might be in abusive relationships. So it's, they're not in a safe environment when they're in these relationships. So do you feel like these are techniques that they can still apply, being at home with an abuser?
Yes, yes. Because I think at the end of the day, the awareness is you start to notice what it is that you need to thrive, right? To become that victor that we're talking about. So sometimes that is the practice, right, of noticing how toxic an environment is, right? Because so often we'll hear, right, that it's hard for someone to leave the situation. And it's not because they don't want to, it's because in many ways, that's still more certain than leaving, right? There's a predictability. As toxic and as unhealthy as it may be, we understand what's going to happen. There's a dynamic and a relationship with someone as opposed to being out there on my own. So we don't want to just leave a situation if we don't have the sense of safety outside of that. So things that people can end up doing is not necessarily creating safety in the relationship because that's been severed, but learning to find safety in the relationship with yourself. And that's really challenging because many individuals in those situations can feel severed, right? We can feel, I don't love the term, but like broken, right? Like our spirit's been broken or something's, been just shattered within us. So that's when I go to the physical of it, right? Like literally taking our fingertips and pressing them into a table or a countertop in front of us, like finding stability throughout my day physically reinforces that I am secure, right? That I can stand here, I'm not going to fall over, I can hold myself up. And sometimes we have to start from those places before we get to the mental aspect of, I'm confident. I have self-esteem. I know what I need. I know what I deserve. I can walk away from this. It's such a leap to get to that, but sometimes we just have to start with the body and we just have to remind the body that it is safe and that it can be safe. And if we recognize I can't feel safe in this environment, then we're more motivated to get out of it. So it's a very delicate, very tricky navigation, if you will, right? Because as we know, it's not as simple as stay or leave, right? But we can slowly titrate that feeling of what does safety feel like? Am I allowed to feel safe again? Who do I trust? And starting with all of those things inside of us, trusting myself, finding security in myself, positive touch, right? That sense of stability and security. It's so many of us take it for granted. And I think just like getting back in touch with that is ultimately the place where it begins.
Hmm. So yeah, thank you for that. So I just wanted to ask as well, what are some simple movement techniques that people can use just to ground themselves during a traumatic experience, for example?
My favorite exercise is actually leaning into the wall. So, and I like it because sometimes we do it and we don't even realize it. When you just feel like your body's so heavy that you can't hold it up yourself and you lean into something. I
Yeah.
mean, sometimes we just flat out sit down. Um, but I do it, I notice like I'm leaning into a countertop, and I'm like, interesting that I just don't feel like I can really hold myself up right now. So again, it's not necessarily something that you have to add into your day or teach yourself how to do. You might notice you're already doing it in many ways, right? Because the stress, the overwhelm is heavy, and it's just a lot of effort and energy to hold ourselves up. So you can do this very simply either by identifying a part of your body that you want to lean against the wall, right? So if it's like your center of gravity and you want to just like lean your hips into the wall, I
Mm.
always like to start with, hands, just um, feeling, the palms and our fingertips like really flat pressed against the wall.
Okay.
And you can kind of play with that, right? So you can have them stretched out if you need to. I tend to keep my arms bent and then I just like lean my whole upper body into the wall. And I'll
Wow.
notice in a matter of seconds, like I just take a deeper breath. My body just like lets go. You can turn around and just, lean your back against the wall, like take the pressure off of your body, allow the wall to absorb some of the pressure and the burden and the overwhelm that you're feeling. Um, and then there's this beautiful metaphor of like standing on your own 2 feet, of intentionally moving away from the wall, pressing away from the wall. Sometimes we have this dance of like leaning and then separating and then leaning and then separating. So that's really my favorite grounding technique, even though it feels very counter to what we hear, which is like plant your feet on the ground and stand up tall and take a deep breath. Because for me, it's also about meeting ourselves where we are. So rather than going to that lifted, light, rooted, grounded place, sometimes we just need to like give in to the exhaustion and the fatigue. And that's leaning on the wall. It can flat out be laying down on the floor. So just notice what feels better for your body in terms of like what you need to feel, again, the safety of coming back to yourself, and coming back to the experience of like, this is my body, this is what I feel in my body. Um, yeah. So the wall for me is like your best friend when it comes to grounding and feeling more stable and secure inside your own skin. And then you can go from there. If you've leaned against the wall, you're feeling more aware of your body and where you are in space, and you step away, that's a great time to plant your feet, drop your heels a few times, feel the weight and the gravity, see if you can lift your body a bit, straighten up if that feels good, lighten the load. And then you can practice those really cleansing deep breaths, right? Breathing into the belly or the diaphragm and a nice sigh, opening our jaw, letting the air out fully. Yeah, it just changes everything because you've met your body where it is. You're not trying to override where it is.
Wow. Yeah, I've never actually ever heard of leaning into the wall, so that's a new one. Thank you. Um,
Sure.
well, yeah.
Right.
Well,
Like again, it's like we're kind of already doing it. I think it's funny because we're used to hearing like, okay, what is this amazing exercise that I
yeah.
have to add to my repertoire? And I'm like, you know
Wall.
what? I mean, more often than not, clients in my office like are doing that. So I was
Oh,
like, notice what you're doing. And after time, I would just notice, wow, a lot of people are just finding comfort in leaning into the wall. Maybe there's something there.
yeah.
Oh yeah, maybe we should lean into the wall more often. So
I love
yeah, so it's not like rocket science, right? It's just like noticing the body and what it needs.
Oh my God, yeah. Because yeah, I'm so glad that you said the wall and not, like surrendering to the universe, like going on the floor and stuff. Do you know?
For some people, but you know, I think you have to be in a very conscious state to do that to begin with, and trauma does not allow us that all of the time. So
Mm. So
yeah.
true, yeah. And I was having a conversation yesterday just about like what's the first thing to do, when you've literally just had a traumatic episode, and
Mm.
people go on about self-love, but that doesn't even come into your remit because what is self-love, what is love, because you're that traumatized. Like the first thing you need to do, like you've already said, is safety. That's
Hmm.
one.
Hmm.
Safety. Get out of any environment that you're in which is causing you harm. That's the first thing. And then
Yeah.
after that, you need to start to just learn to feel, accept what happened even, and then feel present, feel your body. And I just feel
Mhm.
like it's further down the line it comes all, self-love and all.
Yeah, it's a higher construct, right? So, if something happens to us and for someone to just say, well, reflect on that, right? Think about what you could do differently or how to get, problem solve out of this. In
Mm,
theory, it sounds great, but we don't have access to those things when we are in the trauma or even in the re-experience of the trauma, right? So interestingly enough, I'm the next project that I'm working on is actually looking at how do we reestablish safety and connection to our body. And so what I found is like there's this foundation, in terms of like how do we move in our body and what do we notice about our current state? But then really starting at the beginning, much like we do when we're babies, when we're first born into the world, is we need to regulate, right? We need to learn to regulate our body and just to have the experience of, shaking it out and the rooting reflexes and the grounding and the soothing rhythms. And then for me comes the stabilization and the mobilization, right? How do I stabilize my body and how do I mobilize it? Because the mobilization is what's going to be is what's going to allow us to move from the place of threat, quite literally, right? If there's a fire behind me, I need to move out of the way so that I don't get burned,
Yes.
right? But if my nervous system is hijacked and I happen to be in a freeze response, I'm not moving. I'm staying right where I am. So
Mm.
we don't remember what it's like. We these things happened pretty um what's what I'm looking for? Like they happen inherently, right? And as we get older, we're further and further away from the things our body knows to do. And our mind is just like, maybe you need this, maybe
Yeah.
you need that. Should we try this? I don't know. It's like we can't really rely on our minds in those times. So practicing these early movement patterns, right, and revisiting them is what's going to help us feel more secure and stable to move through the trauma, and then to also make sure that if there's any re-traumatization or triggering, that we know what to do in those moments.
Fantastic. No, yeah, I'm really glad you said that. And so, how about because we know that talk therapy is up there when it comes to guideline recommendations, but there's not much to, movement, dance in there at the moment. How do you,
Right.
so how do you feel dance and movement therapy complement traditional talk therapy in trauma treatment?
So dance movement therapy is, at least the way I practice it, and I think the way a lot of dance movement psychotherapists practice it, is an integration of talk therapy and movement. So
Yeah.
it's really, we feel the best of both worlds because it's not one or the other. We're moving, we're using the body, we're allowing communication to come up in all ways, and then verbally processing as we go or when we can. Um, a lot of the sessions I do with clients end up looking mostly like talk therapy sessions,
Okay.
uh,
Mhm.
but the focus is different. And I think a lot of what people don't understand about our particular field is it isn't always the movement coming from the client, it's the felt experience of the therapist as well. Like, I am part of the intervention. I'm noticing what comes up in my body and then using that as a catalyst
Yeah.
to help in the psychotherapeutic relationship, right? So I can be like, wow, I just noticed this in my body. Do you feel that? Where does that feel for, where do you feel that in yourself? Doesn't mean there's always going to be synergy, right? Someone could be like, that wasn't my experience at all. And then I can notice, oh, well, okay, that's me. I will take that information and I will work on that outside of our session, right?
Yeah.
But I think that's the piece that's missing a lot with like somatic experiencing and different somatic interventions. It's always putting the onus, the ownership onto the client or the person looking for help, self-development. Whereas dance movement therapy is very much about this kinesthetic relationship, this kinesthetic empathy
Yeah.
that is learned and exuded by the therapist itself. So that's what I value about what we do is it's really a marrying and looking at all of the communication, talk and nonverbal.
Yeah.
And I have so much respect for talk therapists. I'm trained as one because in order to like bill insurance and stuff in my state, that's what's expected. But I think if we're only relying on words, we are doing ourselves as therapists, but especially our clients, a huge disservice because we are not looking at the holistic picture. We're not looking at most of the communication that is present in that room. And I know it's why people will say that they've processed something and then years later it comes back, or they feel like they're done with it and it revisits them in ways that they don't quite understand, right? Because as we know, the body keeps the score. So if the body isn't part of the conversation from the very beginning, um, people will feel like they're spinning their wheels, and they could be in talk therapy for 10, 15, 20 years and still not really get the healing that they need and deserve.
Yeah, very true. Yeah. And then what's your views on medication as well?
I think it's a very individual basis, right? So I am not in the camp that medicine is unnecessary,
Yeah.
right? I'm not also in the camp that it's necessary. I have clients that do both, right? They're on medication and they go to a therapist.
Yeah.
They try a medication for a while, and then when they're feeling better, they go off of it again within parameters and under doctor supervision.
Mm.
My concern for medicine is that that's what we're first turning to,
Yeah.
right? We're not, and every physician obviously is going to be different. I use my experience. So my not my therapist, but my physician, my primary care physician, is always looking to work with me in terms of, hey, this is something on our radar.
Yeah.
There's a quick fix in medication, or you could do your exercise, you could change your daily lifestyle, your eating habits, and we could see how the numbers shift.
That's good.
And I always try to go in that direction. I'm like, oh, I'll up my cardio. I'll watch what I'm eating a little bit more than I have been. Let's see what happens. And if the numbers go in our favor, I don't need to take medication, which comes with so many other side effects.
Exactly.
If you do everything you can and all of those symptoms are still there, I think that's when medication can be really beneficial, right? Whether it's mental health, physical health, it's all the same, right? Medication should not be a band-aid. We need to address the symptoms
Yeah.
and the reasons and the causes for those symptoms. And if they're still there and we need support to help address them, that's when medication can be really beneficial and really helpful. I personally think we should look at all of the options first, and medication should be the second, right? Or like medication should be adjunct, not therapy.
Exactly. Yeah.
um,
True.
and I
True.
recognize as people probably listening, a lot of times people are like, well, I can't survive without my medicine. Like that's what keeps me balanced. Okay, great. We talked about security and balance. And if whatever's going on in you, right, requires some medicinal intervention to even get to some sense of awareness, balance, security, etc., then that's what works for you, right? I never want people to feel like they don't have a choice, you know? And medications can be dangerous in the respect that they are, we build a tolerance to them, we start to rely on them. I could go on and on, but the last thing I'll say about medication is so many medications actually numb our sensory experience.
Mm.
And so you're not getting in touch with your body. You're not getting in touch with what you feel. You're numbing what you feel. And years later, people will say, oh, I'm so good. I'm feeling so much better. I'm going to start to go off my medication. And then when they do, they feel even worse because they haven't known what it's like, what feeling is like, so
So
the
true.
anxiety that was so unbearable is way worse now because I haven't felt my anxiety in 10 years. Right.
So true.
So it's, again, it's a living, breathing conversation. I have been on medication myself. I've gone off of the medication. I treat it very delicately. And sometimes we need that because of just the state of dis-ease and dysregulation that we're in. And then I think we have to keep having those conversations, right? When we feel a shift and we notice that we're getting back to whatever feels like ourself, that we have a conversation with our provider of like, okay, how do I change this? How do I get off of this? Do we go down a dose? It's always a conversation. I can't speak to other countries. It's really hard in the US, I think, because psychiatry in particular has really gone the route of like medication management.
Yeah.
So you're getting a practitioner that talks to you about how you're feeling, but then you get a doctor that is just prescribing the medicine. They used to be integrated, right? Psychiatrists used to do the psychotherapy and then would get a really good understanding of how this patient is doing and what we can do to support them if we need medication. I'm not going to say some doctors aren't still doing that, but I know that that's not the norm. And that's really frustrating for people going through that system. So that was a really long-winded answer, but that's how I feel. Like it's
Yeah.
necessary for a lot of people, but we don't want to use it as a band-aid, right? Like don't cover up use it to help support and get yourself back to a sense of, stability and safety.
Totally. Oh wow, no, yeah, I think you answered that really well, and no, thank you very much. And because that's exactly how my own views about it as well. Here as well, it's up there in the guidelines. Antidepressants, anti-anxiety tablets, and yeah, you just think, well, let's try other interventions before we start to put all this medicine inside of you. So
Yeah, well, and now we're finding that, there's these conversations that a lot of the antidepressants and anti-anxiety meds that are being prescribed, while like mental and physical health, I think are one and the same, the origin is not actually anxiety, right? It's like, oh, your hormones are out of balance and that's creating a shift in your mood.
exactly.
But if we had looked at like how, let's get the levels checked, let's balance your hormones, let's see what happens to your anxiety, it could go away.
Yeah,
But you have anxiety, so here's your medication. And
exactly.
now we're kind of dependent on the medication. And then when it's time to get ready, like to wean ourselves off of it because our hormones have shifted or we've treated the underlying cause, it's really hard to not take the medicine because now we start to have side effects from the withdrawal of the medication.
Yeah,
So yeah, there's no right answer. It's just it's
exactly.
tricky. I personally am always like, what can I do before medicine?
Yeah,
Right. And then if that's the necessary step, then we'll take it. But I don't take it no questions asked.
good.
I think it's my own control thing too. Like I feel like I'll lose a little bit of my own control if I'm taking a medicine that I don't know what it's doing to my body.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, yeah, that's great advice. Yeah. So thinking about just some of your client work, do you have any success stories that you can share?
Oh yeah. So it's always a hard question because I'm like, I have to go through the Rolodex in my head. Um, for the first like 7 years of my work, I only worked with older adults. And so a lot of the experiences that I had were individuals that were losing their cognitive abilities and diagnosed with dementia or even like movement disorders like Parkinson's or Huntington's. So I still am really attached to that work and that clientele. But more and more, I've been working with, yeah, everyday overwhelm, anxiety, trauma. And so I think one of the experiences that stands out the most to me, this was one of my early experiences as a therapist. I was working with an individual who um, came from a lot of attachment trauma. There was a lot of attachment wounding from her parents who had divorced when she was young. There was a lot of like identity confusion with regard to race, and um, there had been some sexual trauma when she was younger. And one of our first sessions, just for some background, she was actually looking for music therapy because she liked music and she wanted something more expressive because she'd been in talk therapy for like 10 years and felt like she had reached a plateau. And when she went to go see a music therapist and was explaining all of these symptoms, she had like psychosomatic pain that doctors couldn't really explain. Her hips were bothering her knees were bothering her. She was having these episodes of like blackouts, but again, no neurological reasoning for it. The music therapist actually said, I think you should see a dance therapist. And she was like, why would I do that? I'm not a dancer. I don't even like to dance. So she said, because you're explaining a lot of body-based symptoms. Not that music can't, address those, but you might want to go with someone that can, help you understand and reconnect to those parts of your body. So early on in one of our first sessions, she identified this pain that she had been feeling like in her knees, again, her hips and like her lower back. And I remember asking her if she felt comfortable getting into like a cat cow position, right? So like on all fours on the floor. Again, I'm always asking people if they feel comfortable with this, if I'm going to touch, can I touch you here? Is this okay? Especially with individuals that are survivors of, physical assault. So I just had her simply curve her spine, kind of this idea of like bringing her head to her tailbone and just observed when the movement stopped. And so there was this beautiful sequential movement till about mid back. And then it kind of just, it went here and then here. There was like this whole range of like her lumbar that really wasn't mobile. And I'm not great with anatomy, so I can't really speak to all the vertebrae, but like it was clearly a stuck place. And I noticed it and asked her to do it again. The same thing happened. And I asked her for permission to put my hand on her spine and see if I could just kind of like slowly work each vertebrae, right? So she could, slowly, intentionally move each one like this. And so she curved, and then we identified that spot where it stopped. And so, I asked again if I could just put both my hands on that part of her back. And I said, "Do you feel that?" "Yes." What do you notice? And then a very simple intervention that a lot of somatic therapists use. I just asked her, if this part of your body could talk, what would it say? And there was a voice in my head that kind of started laughing because I was like, oh my God, this is woo woo. Like she's going to be like, are you kidding me? This is why I wanted to see a music therapist, right? But it got very silent, and I just trusted the process. And she actually like started to cry, and she said, it's lonely and it needs attention. And so we just sat with that for a moment, and I asked her, like, does that mean anything to you? What kind of attention does it need? And she basically said, like, it's a part that I shut down a long time ago. I want to get back in touch with it, but I've been ignoring it for a long time. And that was the goal of our work, was to like get back in touch with that part, which was really a much younger part, right? A lot of it was the abused part that needed validation and needed to feel safe again. And that was it. That was like our first or second session. And then we had lovely sessions after that, but some more talking, some more movement. But that's the power of just observation and assessment when it comes to using movement. And again, that like rhythmic expression of the body. It's talking. We just have to really slow down and pay attention.
That's such a beautiful example. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I just can't believe, you literally had instant results.
Yeah, right. Oh, well, I mean, we continued to work together for like 8 years after that. So it was not because it took that long to do the work, but we would uncover these things and then like a new thing would pop up. And
Yeah.
meanwhile, life's going on too. So it'd be like, yeah, I know we're working on this trauma, but let me tell you what happened today. So yeah, it was a beautiful relationship. And we both got a lot out of it. But that is pretty true to somatic work. I mean, it's going to work pretty immediately. And I feel like the only reason it might not work, or there might not be that sense of, yeah, this is going somewhere, is because of the relationship, right? It's like that's what therapy is. It's really about the relationship. So if you've tried somatics and you're like, that didn't work, remember that it's not the intervention, it's most likely the interventionist. So
True.
either, not to say that that person isn't worthy, right, or skillful,
Incredible. Mhm.
but it's the relationship, and there's something about the connection between the two of you that perhaps wasn't working, or there wasn't synergy to help the healing be facilitated. So I think somatics will always work, but keep in mind that there does have to be a relationship to help the healing happen.
Connection. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I suppose it's important, in all aspects of therapy, even with a talking therapist, having that
Sure.
rapport and feeling, comfortable with the therapist. So, but
Yeah, feeling heard, not re-traumatized, right?
Mm,
Not invalidated, because it can so easily trigger that trauma that we're there to treat. So,
totally, yeah, yeah. So what advice would you give somebody new to exploring movement as a therapeutic practice?
um, well, the thing that comes to mind right now is you don't have to understand in order to heal. So sometimes I have this a lot. People will come in and say, well, tell me everything. Why are we doing this? Or, why am I feeling this way? And while I appreciate that, I've recognized this in myself too, that like sometimes that is just another way to help feel like we have control over something we have no control over, right? Or to feel like we understand is really coming from that place of mind. We don't have to feel. We don't have to understand, right, to know what we feel. So if there's confusion, if it's like, I don't know why you can always ask, like, why are we doing this? There should be an understanding as to like, um, comfort of going into a somatic exercise without it just being like, do this, right? But you don't necessarily have to understand why you experienced what you did to know that it's working, right? So it's cliche, but kind of like trust the process. Only you know your body. No one will ever know your body more than you do, even if a lot of it is suppressed. And so if you're getting, an uncomfortable feeling in therapy or, that gut, kind of like that intuition of like something's not right here, it's okay to trust that. Go slow. And that at the end of the day, especially when you're working in somatics, you will feel more and you will feel more intensely. And that's actually a sign that it's working, right? So people have this misconception that like, oh, I'm working in the body and now I feel calm all the time. And, I manage my emotions. They're very even. That's not the point. The point is to actually ride the waves so that when something's really overwhelming, I know how to come back to a baseline. And when something's really underwhelming, I know how to rise to the occasion, right? Kind of bring my energy levels back up. So when you haven't felt something for so long and you open yourself up to the feeling, it will feel so much more intense than it did before. And that's not a bad thing, but that's why we have to go slow. So yeah, there's a lot, I think, to understanding. And it's not just trying something on and okay, I'm all better. It is a dialogue. You're learning to have a relationship with your body, and relationships are really challenging, especially if that's a reason that you're in therapy, right? If you're trying to work on the relationships in your life, you're going to be doing those in therapy with yourself. And so patience and compassion, um, advocating for what you need, taking a break when you need to. That was a lot, but those are all the like
Yeah.
things that I go through with my clients. And like, you may experience these things. That means it's working.
Oh, no. Yeah, absolutely.
Like
I,
the side effects like of the medication you may experience, right? So yeah.
absolutely. But, yeah, I mean, even in therapy, a lot of the time you have to go to some real difficult places, but that's where the healing is. So, it's part
Yeah,
of
and talking about it isn't easy, but so we think, oh, I don't have to talk about it today.
the.
But movement and body is like the direct route in. And so even when you're like, oh, we're not going to talk today, you may be surprised at how quickly stuff comes up. And then again, giving yourself permission that you don't have to talk about it. We just want to, we're opening ourselves up to the experience of the awareness, right? Wow, this brought up something and now I'm crying, right? Or this brought up something and I'm so enraged. We don't have to understand why in that moment. We just want to sit with and create space for what's coming up. So
True.
um yeah, there's no right way to do it. It's the right way for you. And yeah, feeling like you can have that open relationship or talk with the therapist or the facilitator.
Excellent. Yeah. Oh, thank you. And so, where can my listeners find more about what you do and where can they find you?
Yeah, well, I'm pretty active on Instagram. My handle is the therapist who moves you. So feel free to connect with me or message me there. Um, my website has some more information and articles. So it's just ericahornthal.com. And yeah, that's probably the best place, either website or social media. But if people are interested in learning more about this work or doing it for themselves, I have lots of resources that they can check out. Body Aware, I have a card deck I just published called the Movement Therapy Deck. And then next summer, I'll be publishing a 365-day journal on how to get out of your head and get into your body.
Wow, a lot's going on for you
Yeah.
then. Fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah. Anything to help people reconnect to themselves. So that's the goal.
And do you do any online sessions?
I do actually. Yeah, I do a lot of like somatic consultations. So sometimes people aren't necessarily looking for therapy, but want to get kind of um, one-on-one guidance, right? Like a lot of people have, said, "Oh, I read this," or I'm practicing with the card deck, and I would love to kind of work with you one on one to see how I can deepen this practice, or I'm kind of hitting a wall here. What are some suggestions that you might have? So yeah, I'm happy to do kind of one on one somatic consults over the internet. And then obviously, if anybody listening is actually in my area, I do see clients in my office in Chicago.
Perfect. That's fantastic. So, because obviously, we have a global audience here, so it's
Mhm.
great that that they can contact you. So, listeners, please do get in touch with amazing Erica, who's just full of
Mhm.
all this amazing knowledge on, healing from trauma. So, I just think it's fantastic the work that you're doing, and I salute you, and I wish you all the success with your onward journey.
Oh, thank you so much. And for creating this platform, and helping people heal from their trauma. We just need to feel empowered. We need different information because we're not all the same and we heal differently, but we all deserve to heal. So thank you again for the time and space and inviting me onto your platform.
Oh, an absolute honor. Thank you for your time. So that's all we have time for today, my beautiful listeners. And yeah, again, please do get in touch with Erica. I will be leaving all her links in this podcast episode. Thank you for tuning in with us today. It's an absolute honor to have you on. And it's an absolute honor to you, my listeners, for tuning in. Take care, everyone, and see you in the next episode.